He was lost in the storm, and I became both his calm and his chaos. The rain hit suddenly, hammering the streets with an urgency that made him curse under his breath. He had been caught off guard, walking home from work, and the sky had opened without warning. Water seeped into his shoes, and the wind tugged at his jacket, leaving him shivering and drenched. Searching for refuge, he spotted a small, warmly lit café tucked between two old buildings. Its windows fogged from the warmth inside, promising shelter from the storm. If you like my story, then subscribe my channel. He pushed open the door, and a small bell announced his arrival. The warmth of the interior wrapped around him like a soft blanket, and the scent of coffee and baked pastries mingled with the lingering scent of rain on the pavement. He shook his head, trying to rid himself of the water, and caught sight of her, a woman standing behind the counter, graceful even in her casual sweater, her hair slightly damp from the weather. Her gaze met his, and for a moment the storm outside seemed to pause. She offered him a gentle smile, her eyes holding quiet curiosity, and gestured toward a towel folded neatly near the register. He hesitated, aware of his wet hair plastered to his forehead, before stepping closer. Their hands brushed briefly as he accepted the towel, and an unexpected warmth shot through him. It was a fleeting touch, almost accidental, but it lingered in his mind long after. She spoke softly, asking if he wanted a coffee, her tone carrying a soothing rhythm. He nodded, grateful for the distraction from the rain pounding at the windows. As she prepared his drink, he studied her with quiet fascination, the subtle lines of experience on her face, the way she moved with both confidence and ease, the calm presence that seemed to fill the small space. He felt a strange pull, an unexplainable connection that made him both cautious and intrigued. Sitting at a corner table with the warmth of the coffee seeping into his hands, he found himself watching her as she moved behind the counter. There was a rhythm to her gestures, a quiet grace that contrasted with the chaos of the storm outside. He realized how unusual it was to feel this drawn to someone in such a brief encounter, an odd mix of comfort and curiosity stirring in his chest. By the time the rain slowed to a drizzle, he felt as if he had already shared a private moment with her, though nothing had truly been said beyond simple pleasantries. The storm had driven him to her door, but staying seemed less about shelter from the rain and more about the unexpected calm she brought into the turbulence of his day. In this first encounter, the emotional groundwork was laid, vulnerability met quiet strength, hesitation met intrigue, and the spark of a connection neither fully understood flickered into life. The audience senses the beginning of a slow, compelling journey where warmth and tension intertwine, hinting at the emotional depth to come. The storm had passed, leaving the streets glistening under the muted glow of streetlights. He found himself returning to that small café the next day, compelled more by curiosity than habit. The warmth of the place welcomed him again, but this time it wasn't just the scent of coffee or the cozy atmosphere that drew him in, it was her presence. She stood behind the counter, quietly arranging pastries, her movements calm yet purposeful. Their eyes met, and a small smile passed between them. It wasn't a grand gesture, but something in that fleeting recognition made him feel understood, as if she had noticed the small storm inside him that he rarely let anyone see. He approached, trying to appear casual, though his palms felt damp and his chest oddly tight. They spoke briefly at first, exchanging light pleasantries about the weather and the best way to avoid getting soaked in the rain. But even these small words carried a weight, a sense of curiosity and attentiveness that went beyond ordinary conversation. He noticed the way her fingers brushed the edge of the counter when she laughed at something he said, the soft cadence of her voice that seemed to slow the world around them. As he sat with his coffee, he found himself observing her more closely, the gentle way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, the faint glimmer in her eyes when she smiled. Every gesture felt deliberate yet effortless, like a dance he was only just beginning to notice. He was aware of the subtle tension building between them, a magnetic pull neither could explain, and yet both allowed to linger. She asked him about his day, her tone warm and patient, and he found himself sharing more than he had intended. The words spilled out almost by accident, frustrations from work, the quiet loneliness he often felt, the pressure to have life figured out at his age. And through it all, she listened without judgment, her attention steady and unhurried, offering reassurance through presence rather than advice. There was a moment when their hands brushed again, this time across the small table. It was almost imperceptible, but the contact sent a subtle thrill through him, a spark that left him acutely aware of her closeness. He noticed the warmth of her skin, the softness of her fingers, and the way the connection lingered even after they pulled away. It wasn't bold, it wasn't daring, it was tender, intimate, and profoundly human. The more he spoke, the more he realized how easy it was to be around her. The initial awkwardness melted into comfort, and the tension that had made his heart race transformed into a quiet anticipation. He wanted to hear her laugh again, see the gentle expression in her eyes, feel the quiet steadiness she brought to the chaos of his thoughts. By the time he left the café, he carried with him a lingering warmth and a sense of longing, subtle but undeniable. Their connection was delicate, still forming, yet the foundation of trust, curiosity, and mutual recognition had been laid. The audience begins to sense the slow unfolding of a bond that will grow stronger with each shared moment, each lingering glance, and each carefully measured touch. The days that followed were quiet but significant, marked by small gestures and fleeting moments that spoke louder than words. He returned to the café often, not out of habit, but because of the subtle pull she seemed to exert, like gravity, gentle yet undeniable. Each visit revealed more about her, about the spaces she inhabited and the way she carried herself. There was a serenity to her presence, a quiet confidence that contrasted sharply with the turmoil he often felt inside. One afternoon, after the café had emptied of the midday crowd, he found himself lingering at a corner table while she wiped down the counters. The soft sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the warmth in her hair, and he realized he was studying her more than the menu in front of him. She noticed, her eyes flicking up with a hint of amusement, but instead of embarrassment, she offered a small, knowing smile. It was as if she understood the pull he felt toward her, the unspoken tension between curiosity and caution. He decided to open up, cautiously at first, about the pressures he'd been carrying, late nights at work, family expectations, and the persistent feeling of being adrift. She listened, her posture relaxed yet attentive, her eyes steady and encouraging. There were no rushed answers or empty reassurances, just the quiet rhythm of her presence, a grounding force that made it easier for him to breathe. As he spoke, she reached across the table, her hand brushing his lightly. A fleeting touch meant more for reassurance than anything else. It was electric in its simplicity. He felt the warmth of her skin, the steadying pressure of her fingers, and in that moment, he realized how rare it was to encounter someone who could soothe without words, who could calm the chaos swirling inside him simply by being near. Their conversation drifted from serious topics to lighter ones, punctuated by small bursts of laughter. He noticed the subtle nuances, the way she tilted her head while thinking, how her fingers traced the rim of her cup absent-mindedly, and how she seemed to create a space where he could just be himself, unguarded and vulnerable. There was a magnetic balance in their dynamic. His restless energy met her calm, and her quiet steadiness met his longing for connection. When it was time for him to leave, she lingered at the doorway, her presence filling the small space with warmth. He felt a pang of reluctance to walk away, a desire to remain in the quiet intimacy they had created. Their eyes met, and the silent understanding passed between them. This was more than chance. There was a pull neither could ignore, a bond forming quietly, patiently, like a river carving its path through stone. By the end of the day, he walked away from the café feeling lighter, as if her calm had steadied the turbulence inside him. For the audience, this chapter deepens the emotional resonance. Vulnerability met understanding, small gestures carried profound meaning, and the slow burn of attraction became more tangible. The story hints at the intimacy and trust that will grow, the subtle tension that will continue to ripple beneath their interactions, and the sense that their connection is slowly, inevitably, becoming something extraordinary. The following week, the city seemed softer after the storms had passed, washed clean and glimmering under the early evening sun. He found himself walking along familiar streets, tracing the route that led inevitably back to the café, not just for coffee, but for the moments he shared with her, the quiet presence that seemed to anchor him. She was there, arranging the chairs and dusting the shelves, her movements deliberate yet effortless. As soon as she noticed him, her eyes lifted, and the brief smile she offered felt like an invitation into a world he hadn't known he was seeking. He returned it with a nod, heart beating a little faster, aware that something unspoken had begun to grow between them, a tension neither dared to name aloud. They spoke, but less than before. Words felt unnecessary, heavy, and they both leaned into silence instead. He watched the way her fingers hovered over a stack of books, the soft flutter of her lashes as she glanced his way, and the subtle shift of her stance when he approached. Each small gesture felt intimate, charged with a quiet electricity, and he noticed the warmth spreading through him just by being near her. When she asked a casual question about his plans for the weekend, he realized his pulse quickened, not because of what she asked, but because of how she asked it. There was a gentle curiosity in her tone, a softness in her gaze, as if she were inviting him to step closer, emotionally, without forcing him. In return, he found himself listening more intently, aware of her presence, as if it had become a physical weight and a comfort all at once. At one point, reaching for the same sugar jar, their hands touched. It was fleeting, almost accidental, but the contact lingered in his mind far longer than it lasted in reality. The warmth of her skin against his, the subtle brush of her fingers, it left a spark, a quiet acknowledgement of the tension simmering just beneath their words. Neither pulled away abruptly. Instead, they allowed the moment to stretch, as though testing the boundaries of propriety without saying so. As the afternoon light softened, he noticed the rhythm of their shared space. The way she leaned slightly forward while listening, how her laughter, soft and melodic, seemed to echo in the small room, and how every glance between them carried meaning beyond conversation. There was a delicate push and pull, a dance of proximity and restraint, where desire was implied, not declared. The unspoken tension reached a subtle peak when she excused herself to attend to a customer. He sat back, hands wrapped around his cup, feeling the absence of her presence like a gentle ache. For the first time, he recognized how much her quiet attention had become a necessity, a calm in the chaos of his restless thoughts, yet a chaos in itself because of the yearning it stirred. By the time he left the café that evening, he was acutely aware that their bond was evolving. Not through words or overt gestures, but through glances, touches, and shared silences that spoke volumes. The audience senses the slow, deliberate rise of romantic tension, desire implied, affection growing, and the anticipation of what might happen next hanging delicately between them. The stage is set for emotional vulnerability and deeper intimacy in the chapters to come. The rhythm of their connection had become familiar, small touches, lingering glances, and the shared silences that seemed to hold more meaning than words ever could. Yet life, with its quiet insistence, began to intrude. One late afternoon, he arrived at the café, hoping for another easy conversation, only to feel the subtle shift in her energy. She was distracted, polite, yet her smile lacked the warmth that usually made him feel seen. He asked if everything was all right, and she hesitated, glancing away before admitting that she had a personal matter weighing on her, something she hadn't shared with anyone. He noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers traced the edge of the counter nervously. It was the first crack in the seamless calm she usually radiated, and it startled him. For the first time, he realized that her strength did not make her invincible, it made her human. Their conversation drifted from light topics to deeper concerns. He shared a fear he had been carrying, the idea that their connection might be misunderstood by others, or that the gap between their ages could create obstacles they weren't ready to face. The words were difficult to voice, but she listened, leaning slightly closer across the table. There was a vulnerability in her gaze that mirrored his own hesitation. As he spoke, she reached across the small space, lightly placing her hand over his. The touch was gentle but intentional, a reassurance that she understood without judgment. He felt the warmth of her skin and the quiet steadiness of her presence, and for a moment, the uncertainty and fear that had built up inside him eased. Yet the touch also made him acutely aware of the emotional stakes, the risk of wanting someone so deeply, knowing the world might not always understand. Later, they found themselves walking together under the soft glow of streetlights, the evening quiet except for the distant hum of the city. A tension lingered between them, unspoken but palpable, as if they were circling a question neither dared to ask. He glanced at her, noticing the small sigh that escaped her lips, the slight frown in her brow. The vulnerability in her expression pulled at him, and he instinctively reached out, brushing her arm gently as they walked. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let him close, letting the physical connection speak for the words they hadn't yet shared. The conflict of the day, the doubts, the worries, the unspoken fears, began to dissolve in the warmth of their shared space. They laughed softly at an inside joke, the sound mingling with the quiet night, and the tension that had built up gradually gave way to comfort. Their emotional bond had been tested, revealing not only their fears but also the trust and care they had for each other. By the time he returned home, he carried a sense of clarity. Vulnerability had not pushed them apart, it had drawn them closer. The audience witnesses the subtle tension of life intruding on romance, and the way emotional honesty and quiet gestures of reassurance can deepen intimacy. The story is building toward the point where the emotional stakes are high, and the slow-burn tension is primed to reach its peak. The evening had settled into a quiet hush, the soft glow of streetlights spilling through the windows of her apartment as he stepped inside. It was a world apart from the chaos of the city, a small sanctuary filled with muted colors, the gentle hum of music, and the faint scent of jasmine lingering in the air. He felt his chest tighten with anticipation, an unspoken awareness that tonight, something important would shift between them. They moved through the space in comfortable silence, each action deliberate yet effortless. She poured them tea, the warmth of the cup grounding him as he held it in both hands, and he noticed the subtle tremor in his own fingers, not from the drink, but from the closeness he felt to her. She placed a soft hand on his arm as she passed, a fleeting brush that sent a quiet thrill up his spine. It was a simple gesture, but in that instant, it spoke volumes about trust, familiarity, and something more profound stirring beneath the surface. They sat together on the sofa, shoulders brushing, each aware of the weight of proximity. The air was thick with anticipation, a tension that had been slowly building over weeks of shared glances, accidental touches, and quiet conversations. He watched the way her hair fell softly around her face, how the light caught her eyes, and felt a pulse of longing that he could no longer ignore. As they talked, the conversation deepened, no longer casual, but raw and honest. He shared memories of mistakes and regrets, fears that had haunted him, the loneliness he often masked behind humor and routine. She listened, her eyes steady, her presence unwavering. Then she revealed her own vulnerability, a quiet acknowledgement of the moments she feared were misunderstood or overlooked. There was no rush, no pressure, only the simple, profound act of being truly seen by another human being. At one point, their hands met again, this time resting together on the edge of the sofa. Fingers intertwined lightly, hesitant at first, then with a growing confidence born from trust. He felt the warmth of her hand, the softness of her skin, and the gentle pulse that seemed to echo his own. She leaned slightly closer, resting her head on his shoulder, and he felt the quiet steadiness of her heartbeat against his chest, a rhythm that calmed and stirred him at once. They lingered like that, wrapped in a cocoon of shared presence. Every glance, every brush of hair, every soft smile conveyed longing, care, and the delicate intensity of a bond fully acknowledged but not rushed. Words were sparse, because words could not capture the depth of what was unfolding, the mixture of desire, trust, and emotional intimacy that had been carefully nurtured over time. By the end of the evening, the tension had softened into a quiet satisfaction. They had crossed the threshold of emotional vulnerability and emerged closer, a subtle acknowledgement of romantic desire now woven seamlessly into their connection. The audience feels the emotional climax. The slow-burn tension has reached its peak, the intimacy is palpable, and the story is poised for a warm, satisfying resolution in the final chapter. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains, casting a gentle glow over the room where they sat together. The city outside was waking up slowly, the distant hum of traffic mingling with birdsong, but inside, time seemed to stand still. He felt the warmth of her presence beside him, a quiet, steady comfort that had grown from weeks of stolen moments, shared confidences, and gentle touches. They had spent the night talking, laughing, and simply being near each other, allowing the vulnerability and trust that had taken root to flourish fully. Now, in the soft light of day, it felt effortless, natural. He reached for her hand, and she offered it without hesitation. Their fingers intertwined, resting lightly in a simple yet profound display of connection. Every brush of skin, every shared breath, reinforced the bond that had grown slowly but surely. Breakfast was quiet, almost ritualistic, yet every glance and gentle smile carried unspoken meaning. He watched her as she poured tea, her movements graceful and calm, and felt an unexpected swell of admiration and affection. He marveled at how someone could carry both quiet strength and subtle vulnerability, and how her presence could make the chaotic edges of his life feel manageable. She, in turn, noticed his gaze, a soft blush touching her cheeks, and she reached over to straighten the napkin in front of him, her fingers brushing his hand again in a tender, familiar way. They spoke of small things, plans for the day, mundane observations, but there was a new ease in their conversation. No longer weighted by hesitation or doubt, their words flowed gently, accompanied by glances that lingered just a little longer than necessary. It was a delicate dance of closeness and comfort, where physical affection, resting heads on shoulders, hands brushing, casual touches, blended seamlessly with emotional intimacy. The audience senses that this is not a relationship built on grand gestures, but on depth, understanding, and mutual respect. Later, they moved to the small balcony, wrapped in a shared blanket as the morning air carried a crisp freshness. He felt the steady warmth of her shoulder against his, her presence anchoring him in a way he had never known he needed. She laughed softly at a memory from the previous night, and he joined in, the sound of their shared joy filling the quiet space around them. There was no rush, no expectation, only the serene acknowledgement that they belonged, in this moment and in the gradual unfolding of their connection. By the end of the morning, the storm, both literal and metaphorical, had passed entirely. What remained was a tender, enduring intimacy that was fully mutual. They leaned into each other, a quiet embrace sealing weeks of emotional build-up, a subtle promise of companionship, trust, and gentle desire. The story concludes on a note of warmth and fulfillment, with their bond secure, their affection tangible, and their connection fully realized. For the audience, the resolution is deeply satisfying. The slow-burn tension, the age gap dynamic, and the emotional intimacy all find a harmonious balance. Calm and chaos coexist beautifully, leaving viewers with a sense of gentle fulfillment, emotional resonance, and the quiet magic of two people finding each other in the storm.